The laugh came first, quiet at first, then bright and cutting, ricocheting off the marble walls of the courtroom. Judge Beryl's voice carried a trace of amusement, a tone that said, "Child, don't take yourself too seriously." Reporters blinked, fingers hovering above keyboards, unsure whether to record or recover from the surprise. The cameras caught every frame. Jasmine Crockett, standing tall at the counsel table, her hands steady, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed forward. The air smelled of paper, old wood, and silent judgment. Every breath in the room hung in the space between the judge's laughter and Jasmine's stillness. It wasn't the first time a young black woman had been underestimated in a space built to look objective but shaped by quiet power. Yet something about this moment felt different, like pressure building before a thunderclap. The narrator's voice curls through the tension, low and mesmerized. Some moments in history don't announce themselves.
They whisper. They smirk.
And only when they're answered with truth do we realize we've been watching a pivot point all along. Jasmine doesn't move. Her posture, perfect, almost statue-like, becomes defiance in still form. Her silence says what words cannot: laugh now. I'm coming for your assumptions. The spectators, interns, analysts, passing staffers, watch her with the guilt of witnesses who know something cruel has unfolded but can't quite name it. On the far side of the courtroom, a tabloid journalist mutters, "Oh, this clip's going viral tonight." The judge shifts in her chair, still smiling. A pen taps gently against the bench. Outside, the summer light slants through high windows, slicing gold stripes across Jasmine's face. Every second stretches, an invisible countdown toward something no one yet sees. The narrator pauses again. They say laughter is harmless. But in halls of power, laughter can wound deeper than words. It can signal who belongs, and who's being reminded they don't. Jasmine finally exhales. A slow, deliberate breath, measured, unwavering. The cameras tighten their focus, the reporters lean forward. The smile above the bench widens. The audience senses, without reason, that an invisible line has been crossed. They laughed at her, for exactly 37 seconds. What happened in the 38th changed everything. Before the gavel struck that morning, the courtroom already felt too small for what it was about to hold. The walls, lined in oak and complacency, seemed to lean inward, sheltering an invisible authority that had ruled there for decades. This wasn't just another hearing, this was the country staring at itself in high definition, through the cold lens of public scrutiny. Every seat was filled, not just by clerks and counsel, but by the ghosts of precedent, old judgments, and the whispering notion that power has a look, a tone, a gender, a race. Judge Beryl had worn that authority for years like a well-fitted robe, earned, respected, but heavy with the habit of being obeyed. Her smirk earlier wasn't new, it was the same reflex that met every young lawyer who dared to challenge the unspoken order. It said, "I've seen your kind before, and I'll see you out the same door when you're done." Jasmine Crockett had learned to hear that tone long before she set foot in this courtroom. She heard it in college lectures, at polite dinners, in side hallway conversations that dripped with the acid of condescension. But in this room, the stakes weren't her pride, they were the truth. On the table before her lay the case file, sworn testimony, depositions, and a pattern that didn't just show negligence, but something intentional, something brushed aside for convenience. Across the nation, television networks had branded this proceeding minor, a mid-level review unlikely to break headlines. But to Jasmine, it represented the rot beneath polite systems. She understood the numbers, how many similar cases had died quietly before ever reaching a camera's gaze. She knew how far arrogance could stretch when accountability wasn't watching. In the gallery, the hum of shifting bodies signaled a collective guess at how the morning would go. Some came to see a spectacle, others came looking for confirmation that the hierarchy of decorum still held. The reporters had their opening lines drafted: ambitious rookie meets seasoned judge, justice proceeds as expected. None of them expected anything worth rewriting. Jasmine stood with quiet precision, speaking when addressed, measured even in objection. Every sentence she formed met a subtle wall: the judge's interrupted tone, the opponent's smirking disbelief, the courtroom's silent bias. Every refusal to flinch became a kind of rebellion. The narrator intrudes, half whispering. She was the smallest person in the room, yet the only one carrying the weight of what justice was supposed to mean. Outside, crowds gathered near courthouse steps, drawn by a rumor, a young woman unafraid to press the questions others avoided. Clips leaked online, short, grainy videos of the laugh, the silence that followed, the look on Jasmine's face. Already, social media was boiling, some mocking her nerve, others sensing history in motion. The divide grew, pixel by pixel. Within the oak walls, though, everything remained still. The judge leaned back, comforted by her own certainty. Around her, Clerks shuffled papers as though nothing extraordinary brewed beneath the humdrum ritual of procedure. Jasmine could feel it, the slow suffocation of every reformer's dream when it collides with bureaucracy. And yet, in the quiet, her hands found purpose. She rested them over the folder that lay before her like a sealed promise. Inside it waited proof of what the system had missed, or chosen to ignore. She didn't glance at it yet, but she could feel its pulse, a silent heartbeat against the indifference surrounding her. The narrator's voice pins the tension. Fairness isn't always blind. Sometimes it just refuses to look. And as another polite smile formed above the bench, Jasmine's heart steadied into resolve. But no one in that courtroom, least of all Judge Beryl, saw what Crockett had tucked within her folder, evidence so airtight it would make the laughter die mid-echo. Long before that viral laugh echoed through the marble chamber, Judge Beryl was a legend of the bench. Her name carried the chill of authority, the kind of respect that wasn't asked for, only assumed. She had built her career on precision, intellect, and the clean slice of logic that left no argument surviving her courtroom. Justice, to her, was a craft of the mind, not the heart. In her early years, she was known for long hours and short patience, a woman who climbed the judicial ladder not by charming anyone but by outthinking them. Those who clerked for her whispered of two Beryls, the sharp mentor who demanded excellence, and the silent storm that tolerated no imperfection. To young attorneys, she was both dream and terror, a figure who could turn a line of questioning into a trapdoor.
She was brilliant, no doubt.
But the brilliance came with a shadow, a humor so dry it often drew blood. Her laughter was never warm, it was diagnostic. It separated the confident from the unprepared, the powerful from the pretenders. During the height of her career, law students replayed her cross-examinations like sporting highlights. One infamous clip showed her dismantling a corporate lawyer with 9 words and 1 raised eyebrow. If that's your argument, counselor, I recommend better footing. The courtroom had erupted in tension and awe.
To some, it was a masterclass.
To others, cruelty disguised as wit. But no one doubted her control. She never lost her temper because she never needed to. Sarcasm did the work for her. Over the years, that sarcasm hardened. Compliments became condescension wearing pearls. She told herself it was discipline that made her tone so exact, but discipline is often just pride wearing robes. The establishment adored her. She embodied the system working perfectly for itself. Newspapers featured her as a beacon of judicial consistency. Colleagues described her as unflappable. That word followed her like a medal, though secretly it meant she never risked feeling anything deeply enough to shake. Beryl had not started this way. In her youth, she'd believed in transformation, the notion that a courtroom could be the great equalizer. Her first years as a public prosecutor were spent fighting for forgotten victims, and she once wrote in her journal, "Justice must speak to those who have no microphone." Somewhere along the climb, that journal disappeared. She stopped believing reform was possible and began believing that order was the best we could hope for. So when Jasmine Crockett entered her courtroom, Beryl saw not a peer but an echo from the past, idealism she'd once known and then buried. This younger woman's confidence, her moral certainty, stirred something uncomfortable, reflection. So the laugh came easy, almost too easy, the automatic defense of someone allergic to being reminded who they once hoped to be. Clerks had seen it before, the impatience, the quick dismissal. A young attorney would make a heartfelt plea, and Beryl would smile that small, perfect smile that closed every emotional door. Counselors learned to avoid vulnerability because emotion in her courtroom was weakness. Once, a defense attorney's voice cracked mid-sentence, recalling a client's hardship. Beryl had leaned forward and said softly, "Counselor, if I wanted theater, I'd buy a ticket." The gallery had stifled laughs. The case was lost in that moment. There was a time when this same woman might have paused, realized the cruelty behind that line.
But she didn't anymore.
The years had coated her empathy with varnish, the kind polished by praise. Success has a way of turning mirrors into shields. The public adored her composure, the press framed her cynicism as intellect. And with each headline, she allowed herself to believe that clarity demanded distance, that emotion diluted truth. What she didn't notice was that distance becomes blindness when you never step close enough to see. In private moments, she'd occasionally think of her early mentor, a wise judge named Alvarez, who once warned her, "Beryl, never let your laughter speak louder than your conscience." It had sounded poetic at the time. She'd smiled, certain she'd never be the kind to let pride override principle. But pride is subtle. It rarely announces itself. It just teaches you to confuse being right with being righteous. Years later, that confusion ruled her courtroom. Each smirk seemed harmless, just a mark of authority, but it built a habit, mistaking superiority for fairness. So when the young congresswoman turned lawyer Jasmine rose to argue with calm grace, Beryl's reaction wasn't premeditated. It was reflex born of muscle memory, sculpted from decades of unchecked certainty. It wasn't just that Beryl underestimated Jasmine, it was that she couldn't imagine being corrected by someone like her. The laughter that now circled online like wildfire was no anomaly. It was her signature conflict with humility, caught publicly for the first time. And somewhere deep inside, not yet visible, a tiny spark of discomfort flickered, the faint, aching recognition that she might have crossed from commanding respect to performing superiority. So when Jasmine Crockett began to speak, the judge's smirk wasn't personal, it was reflex. But this reflex was about to meet its match. Before Jasmine Crockett stood beneath the courtroom lights, she'd learned to read in laundromats and buses, wherever her mother's shift schedule left room for breath. Her childhood unfolded in a neighborhood where dreams came second to survival, and yet she treated every schoolbook like a key. When blackout hours hit in the summer, she studied under the mute orange glow of a corner street lamp, pages trembling in the humid air. Her neighbors used to tease, "Girl, the city paying you for overtime homework?" She'd smile without looking up. Pride was fuel, distraction was luxury. Her mother, a nurse with calloused hands and humor that never broke, kept a single rule: finish what you start, and do it like folks are betting against you. Jasmine took that literally. She grew up expecting resistance, understanding that dignity wasn't given, it was held. At 19, she walked into her first college lecture wearing thrift store confidence and carrying a chipped briefcase she'd found at a garage sale. The professor introduced the syllabus, then asked the class to name one Supreme Court justice. A few laughed when she spoke first. One student whispered, "Does she even have the textbooks yet?" That sound, half amused, half dismissive, etched itself into her memory.
She didn't answer.
She simply nodded and took better notes than anyone else in the room. Years later, as she pulled all-nighters in law school, older professors called her determined, but she heard the subtext: intense, difficult, ambitious in that inconvenient way that makes people uncomfortable. She developed a survival art, the poker face of professionalism. For every backhanded compliment, her reply was excellence. For every joke muttered after she left the room, her answer was another credential earned. When she interned in her first courtroom, she watched a defense attorney belittle a witness on a technicality. The judge smiled, the gallery chuckled. Justice wasn't cruel, it was careless. That day, Jasmine promised herself she'd never let laughter signal defeat again. Her climb wasn't cinematic, no benefactor, no spotlight. She worked in offices with broken radiators, learned to type briefs while her phone screen cracked because replacing it meant skipping meals. But through the small sacrifices came a rhythm.
Study.
Survive.
Succeed. Repeat.
She built a fortress out of persistence, each long night another brick added quietly to her composure. When she finally ran for public office years later, commentators underestimated her again. Too passionate, one analyst said. Too political, another added, as though truth should come flavorless to be digestible. Her response was characteristically short: too bad.
She won anyway.
The same voters who had been told she was too much realized she was exactly enough. It was that long record of almosts and nevers that had carved her quiet strength. She didn't radiate defiance the way others did, she radiated focus, the kind that unsettles those used to being the loudest in the room. She never shouted down dismissiveness, she met it with data, with receipts, with the kind of paper trail arrogance hates most. People mistake calm for compliance. What they miss is that calm is often the weapon of the truly prepared. Jasmine had spent her life proving that storms don't always roar, sometimes they whisper, waiting until the air is right to strike. Friends said she had a forgiving face, but inside she carried a catalog of every laugh, every sideways smirk, every microdose of disbelief. Not out of bitterness, but memory. She knew the sound of mockery, and she knew what followed it in her life story.
Triumph.
By the time she reached Judge Beryl's courtroom, her reputation preceded her, though few understood its origin. They didn't see the childhood math tutors who quit mid-semester, or the scholarship panels that told her maybe next year. They didn't see the volunteer nights where she counseled tenants facing eviction, reminding them calmly that even when power sneers, you can speak clearly and still be heard. Every experience wove itself into her poise like threads into steel. There's a special fire that builds in those who are constantly underestimated. It burns differently, not with rage, but with purpose. Jasmine mastered that flame until it no longer shook her voice. She wielded it the way a craftsman wields heat, carefully, strategically, turning pressure into form. The night before the hearing, she sat in her office rereading the evidence one more time. The world outside carried on. Traffic, chatter, laughter of those who'd never had to fight for credibility. She smiled to herself, not bitterly, but knowingly. She'd heard those sounds all her life. And they had always meant the same thing: she was on the edge of changing someone's mind. That morning, when she walked into the courtroom, polished and patient, she carried more than a folder of documents. She carried every echo of laughter ever aimed her way, and the knowledge that she had outlasted every single one. So when laughter filled the courtroom, she didn't flinch. She'd heard it before, and every time, it meant she was one breath away from victory. The laughter faded, but its echo clung to the corners of the courtroom like humidity that refused to lift. Judge Beryl straightened in her chair, pen balanced between manicured fingers, eyes narrowed in a performance of patience. "Proceed, counselor," she said, voice dipped in sugar and steel. There was no invitation in her tone, only endurance, as if giving Jasmine Crockett permission to speak was an act of generosity. Jasmine began, voice even, words stitched with precision. Every sentence carried quiet voltage. "Your Honor, as the record reflects, this isn't a question of opinion but consistency in testimony." She turned a page with graceful slowness. The paper sounded louder than usual, its soft whisper magnified by all the held breaths around her. Judge Beryl interrupted before the next word found air. "Miss Crockett, if you intend another lecture on procedure, do make it brief. This court is running on schedule."
The spectators felt the cut. A reporter's keyboard clicked once, then stopped. One intern glanced up, shocked by the bluntness of it. Jasmine didn't blink. "Understood, Your Honor," she replied, not bowing, not biting. She simply returned to her notes like a surgeon ignoring a heckler. The calm was unnerving. It wasn't submission, it was strategy. The narrator's voice flowed through the rising tension like string music tightening toward crescendo. She'd seen this dance before, the arrogance that masks as oversight, the interruption that pretends to be control. But she knew something the judge did not: composure multiplies in confrontation. The defense counsel smirked into his notebook, sensing the judge's alliance. He muttered something under his breath. The clerk stifled a laugh. Jasmine didn't look their way. She lifted her chin and continued, reading dates, quoting lines from transcripts. The tone of her voice, a perfectly balanced metronome, became a kind of defiance. Judge Beryl leaned forward. "Counselor, what exactly are you insinuating here?" "I'm not insinuating, Your Honor," Jasmine said, eyes up for the first time. "I'm reading your own court's record." The shift was imperceptible but electric. The laughter that had once floated freely now hid in nervous throats. A kind of charged silence filled the gallery. Even the air conditioning seemed to hesitate between cycles. Beryl cleared her throat, more sharply than needed. "Let's maintain decorum, Miss Crockett. There's no need for theatrics." Jasmine's reply was smooth as glass. "Decorum is exactly what we're maintaining." The room inhaled collectively. The judge's pen stilled mid-tap, the rhythm broken. For the first time since the hearing began, Jasmine's calm felt like control. Somewhere in the back row, a journalist raised a phone, capturing the moment, the clash of poise and power, broadcast ready. The judge tilted her head, lips curving into that habitual, dismissive smile. "If you're quite finished with the dramatics, continue." Jasmine's tone didn't lift, didn't falter. "Actually, Your Honor, I'm just getting to the evidence. It will take approximately 1 minute to read." What followed was pure theater disguised as legal reasoning. Beryl's eyes lowered to the docket, pretending disinterest, but her posture betrayed her, shoulders tighter, hand gripping the pen that no longer danced. The defense counsel's smile began to fade. The spectators were silent now, leaning forward as if ease of hearing depended on their stillness. The narrator's voice returns, deliberate. This is the sound before the storm, not thunder but breath. The rhythm of someone about to shift an entire power dynamic without raising their voice. Jasmine continued talking, the tempo steady, her cadence unbroken. Each sentence reconstructed what laughter had tried to dismantle: credibility, dignity, control. The courtroom now vibrated with the strange hush of people realizing they might be witnessing a turning point. Judge Beryl leaned back again, composing herself, the smirk half rebuilt. To her left, a clerk wiped invisible dust from the screen, trying to act busy. Everyone could feel the heat building, the kind that has nothing to do with temperature. Pride was sweating. And still, Jasmine spoke softly, each syllable landing like a measured drumbeat against condescension. The courtroom trembled not from volume, but from clarity. At the table's edge, resting near her right hand, a thin folder waited, the one she hadn't opened yet. Its edges were crisp, its presence unassuming. But those who watched closely could sense it, the calm before revelation. Every ounce of her restraint, every word uttered without tremor, had built to this moment. And then, as the laughter lingered, Jasmine reached for one single document that changed the temperature of the entire courtroom.
The faint whisper of paper broke the stalemate. Jasmine Crockett slid the folder toward the center of the table, the soft glide of cardboard against oak amplified by the stillness that had descended over the room. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The judge's gavel rested at her side, gleaming, unused. "Your Honor," Jasmine began, her voice measured, "I'd like to enter Exhibit E into the record." Judge Beryl blinked, mild curiosity masking a flicker of unease.
"Proceed."
The moment the first page unfolded, something invisible shifted. The document wasn't long, barely 3 pages, but every word was stacked with precision, timestamps, affidavit signatures, and a clause that earlier arguments had conveniently treated as non-existent. Each click of the page echoed like a countdown. "This," Jasmine said evenly, "is a direct transcript of the communication referenced on line 19 of the initial testimony. The witness affirmed that his correspondence with the department ended at 10:47 p.m., correct?" The opposing counsel nodded, careless, confident. "That's correct." "Then," she continued, sliding her fingertip across a highlighted line, "perhaps you can explain why this email, sent at 11:02 p.m., contradicts that assertion." The air drew thin. Someone coughed, too loud in the silence. A rustle of suits echoed as spectators leaned forward. Judge Beryl's lips parted slightly. "Counselor, where did you acquire this?" Jasmine didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't gloat. "From the official archive, Your Honor. Stamped, verified, and filed under the wrong index because of a clerical error, a detail your clerk verified this morning."
That landed hard. The clerk froze. The judge turned.
For the first time, uncertainty traced her eyes like a crack through glass. The narrator's voice slipped through the room like smoke. Arrogance trembles not when it is shouted at, but when it meets quiet precision. Jasmine kept going. Calm didn't mean slow, it meant unstoppable. She pointed out the sequence of communications, each timestamp building toward a pattern no one had noticed, or no one had wanted to notice. Every word gathered momentum. Her tone shifted from explanatory to surgical. There was no anger now, only accuracy. "The testimony presented to this court relied on the absence of this record," she said. "But what we see here is not absence, it's omission. Intentional omission." Each repetition of those words snapped another thread in the web of presumption spun earlier in the day. Judge Beryl straightened, retreating slightly into formality. "Ms. Crockett, that's a serious claim." "Yes," Jasmine replied, "and a serious fact." For a full 5 seconds, no one spoke. Reporters stared, unsure if they were allowed to breathe yet. On one of the backbenches, an aide muttered a reverent damn under her breath. The clerk's pen slipped from her hand, clattering against the desk like punctuation. "Your Honor," Jasmine continued softly, "paragraph 7 of the same clause, if you'll turn to page 2, references procedural compliance. Would you mind reading the highlighted portion aloud?" The judge looked down reluctantly, eyes skimming the line. She cleared her throat, voice quieter now. "It states that the witness shall remain accountable for omissions under Section 14 of the perjury statute." The echo of her own words seemed to hang in her throat. The gallery felt it, the poetic recoil of authority quoting its own undoing. Even the defense attorney lowered his head slightly, pretending to reread his notes while his ears burned crimson. Jasmine nodded politely. "Thank you, Your Honor." Beryl's pen began to tap, slow at first, then faster. "Do you have further material evidence?"
"I do," Jasmine said.
"Attached appendices, screenshots of the database log verifying that these communications were accessed and modified 2 days before submission." Her hands moved with grace. Each sheet, each paragraph, each proof laid down like a quiet drumbeat. There was no monologue, no theatrics. Just rhythm and inevitability. The courtroom had turned into an amplifier of truth, the kind that vibrated not through speakers but through conscience. The narrator spoke low and deliberate. This was not a reprimand. It was revelation. A moment so clear even the marble seemed to lean closer. Judge Beryl tried for recovery, voice stable but thin. "Ms. Crockett, the court appreciates your diligence. However, Jasmine gently interrupted, controlled as ever. "Respectfully, Your Honor, due diligence is the court's duty too. And what we've just seen suggests that somewhere along the way, that duty was neglected." It wasn't rebellion, it was accountability spoken with reverence. Silence returned, heavy now. Reporters scribbled furiously, aware that they were witnessing something rare, hierarchy folding under its own weight.
The judge didn't speak.
Her gaze dropped to the papers, then to Jasmine, then back again. Through the quiet, the smallest sound emerged, the steady beating of Jasmine's pulse, audible only to her, keeping time with justice itself. Beryl finally exhaled. The evidence will be admitted. Her tone had lost its gleam, replaced by something quieter, halfway between respect and regret. Jasmine nodded once, not triumphantly but gratefully, like an artist finishing the brushstroke she'd waited all career to paint. She returned the remaining pages to the folder, no flourish needed. Around her, the courtroom breathed out, cautious to disturb this equilibrium. Then, from somewhere in the audience, a slow clap almost began but stopped itself, respect held in suspense. They all knew it wasn't over, but everything had already changed. Judge Beryl's hand trembled slightly on the gavel before finding stillness again. Her practiced poise struggled to rebuild itself, but even her laughter from earlier couldn't pierce this new quiet. Authority had been humbled, not by rebellion, but by order restored. The narrator lingered in the edges of the silence.
She didn't raise her voice.
She raised the standard. A soft murmur rippled through the gallery, the sound of awe trying to disguise itself as breath. Screens across the country began flashing snippets within minutes, the highlight reel of composure defeating condescension, time-stamped proof illuminating pride turned fragile. Commentators would later call it the defining moment of the case. But in that instant, it wasn't politics. It was poetry. The judge finally spoke again, subdued. Court will recess for 10 minutes. No one moved. Jasmine gathered her binder, hands as steady as when she'd begun. As she turned, her eyes caught the reflection of the bench, the same place where laughter had rung just hours before. Now it sat like a monument to silence. She allowed herself the faintest inhale of satisfaction, not of victory, but of justice sharpened clean. The calm she carried since childhood had reached its apex here, not in anger, but in the serenity of being undeniably right. The laughter was gone. In its place, only the rhythmic sound of a pen tapping nervously against wood. What happened next spread across the internet before the recess was even called. It started with a short clip, 38 seconds of stillness, composure, and the unmistakable sound of authority bowing to evidence. Within an hour of recess, it was everywhere. The courtroom lighting became cinematic under 1,000 edits. Someone added a dramatic soundtrack, another slowed the crucial moment to highlight the judge's blinking pause. On one feed, the caption read, "When Grace Meets Receipts." By dusk, 20 million views. By morning, 50. The original broadcast gave way to commentary clips, podcasters, YouTubers, late-night hosts dissecting every micro-expression, every syllable of Jasmine's calm dismantling. Each platform found its own frame, truth over arrogance, poise over privilege, intellect over insult. Viewers didn't just watch, they testified. Twitter boiled first. Hashtags ignited like sparks, hashtag calmwins, hashtag Crockett effect, hashtag receipts over rhetoric. Progressive communities flooded timelines with pride, threading clips of the exchange with stories of their own first dismissals. Teachers who doubted them, bosses who talked over them, panels that laughed before listening. The comment sections turned confessional, every suppressed frustration finding voice through her restraint. See. One post read beneath Jasmine's photo, her eyes mid-glance unshaken. "You don't have to yell to be louder than a system built to silence you." It was retweeted 500,000 times. Meanwhile, the critics scrambled. Talk shows whose tone had once been smug shifted gears overnight. Analysts softened their vocabulary. What yesterday was inexperienced bravado became today's unexpected mastery. Some tried to spin the event as coincidence, as a lucky break in procedure, but the visual truth was too visceral to rewrite. Audiences had seen what they'd seen, power questioned, then quietly corrected. On YouTube, montages appeared, Jasmine's calm juxtaposed with moments of historic dissent. Rosa Parks in shadow, Malala at the podium, Greta Thunberg before the UN. One video titled, "The Day Calm Became a Weapon," reached 12 million views in less than 24 hours. Influencers who rarely touched politics now quoted her. TikTokers stitched themselves standing before mirrors, mouthing her key lines like affirmations. It wasn't just a clip, it had become ritual. The narrator's voice glides over scrolling screens, soft but awed. She didn't just win a case. She redefined what victory looks like: less roar, more reason. Less spectacle, more substance. Cable news caught up slowly. Morning anchors aired freeze frames of the moment the judge's face fell. A conservative guest remarked, grudgingly impressed, "I'll give her this, she doesn't flinch." His co-host smiled thinly, sensing history unfolding outside partisanship. Because whatever side viewers were on, everyone understood that balance had shifted, poise had become power's new language. Comments from ordinary people flooded the digital ether. Someone in Chicago wrote, "My daughter watched that clip and said, 'Mom, that's how I'll handle bullies.'" An immigrant family in Texas filmed a reaction, the father saying through tears, "She reminds me of every time we had to prove ourselves twice." That one video alone crossed borders, racking up millions of translations and subtitles added by volunteers. Memes multiplied faster than press statements. A split screenshot of Jasmine and Judge Beryl turned into a running format. Captions like "before receipts" / "after receipts," "confidence checkmate," and "laughter's final echo." What yesterday had been humiliation morphed into symbolic reversal. Even entertainment networks joined in. Late-night hosts reenacted the testimony, pausing midline to deliver punchlines about how facts still matter, apparently. The audience laughter this time wasn't cruel but restorative, a collective sigh of relief wrapped in applause. Brands and advocacy groups caught the wave, posting public commendations. Calm is power. Truth looks good in confidence. Here's to every Jasmine who refuses to shrink. The story transcended the case itself. It became metaphor, shorthand for every moment dignity had ever been underestimated. Through it all, Jasmine remained silent publicly, issuing only one short statement through her office: "I believe in preparation as the highest form of respect." That single sentence was reposted across accounts like scripture. The narrator leans closer now, the tone intimate. "We thought we were watching one woman hold her own in a courtroom. We didn't realize we were watching a generation see themselves vindicated." By the third day, even Judge Beryl's name trended, accompanied not by derision but introspection. Columnists penned think pieces about the culture of condescension, about how laughter in halls of power isn't harmless when it echoes around those still climbing the steps toward it. Programs debated what justice sounds like when spoken without trembling. None of this could be controlled anymore. The story had escaped its origin. There was something healing in the chaos, a rare equilibrium between outrage and pride, between entertainment and enlightenment. Viewers who didn't normally care about courtrooms suddenly cared very much about this one. Some replayed the clip not out of spite, but out of reverence, listening for the exact breath where composure conquered mockery. Screens lit up worldwide with that single frozen frame: Jasmine standing upright, folder closed, victory unspoken. And in every replay, the moment grew larger than life, a beacon transmuting into myth. But even as millions shared the clip, few noticed how one quiet moment afterward revealed what this victory really meant. The courtroom was empty now, or nearly so, just the faint echo of footsteps and the sigh of cooling air vents. The chaos outside had faded to a distant hum. Inside, silence reclaimed its throne. Papers sat where they'd been shuffled, chairs leaned slightly askew, a tableau of conflict that had finally exhaled. Jasmine Crockett remained at her table, methodically gathering her files, aligning the edges until they formed a perfect stack. No audience, no applause. Just the soft rhythm of order returning to her hands. Across the room, Judge Beryl still sat, half turned toward the bench's shadows, her expression unreadable. For the first time, she looked smaller, not diminished but human. It was the quiet after a storm, not of destruction but of revelation. The narrator's voice, lower now, carries weight without judgment. Laughter is impulse, truth is discipline. One vanishes into air, the other leaves marks that outlast careers. Beryl's gavel sat untouched. She could have cleared her throat, could have asserted control again with a single command. But authority, once shaken, requires humility to rebuild. She watched Jasmine close her folder, the same folder that had stripped a century of condescension bare in under an hour. Somewhere deep within, something old and proud gave way to reflection. Jasmine turned to leave. As she did, she caught the judge's eye for a fraction of a second. No words passed, none were needed. Respect had been earned in the most uncomfortable way possible, by being undeniable. The narrator continues, deliberate, almost reverent. We measure justice too often in verdicts and sentences. But sometimes, it reveals itself in a single moment of composure, a reminder that power borrowed from arrogance can be reclaimed through truth. The door creaked as Jasmine pushed it open. Outside, the fading light scattered gold across the hallway floor. Staffers and clerks glanced up as she passed, unsure whether to congratulate her or simply observe. She nodded to each, polite, precise, carrying the same stillness that had undone laughter itself. Meanwhile, Judge Beryl remained on the bench. Her eyes drifted toward the empty witness chair. Not guilt, recognition. She saw there the reflection of every voice she'd interrupted, every smirk she'd gifted to young dreamers trying to prove themselves. The image stung because it was hers. Pride, when cracked, does not shatter, it lets the light in. And tonight, light came pouring through jagged understanding. The camera of public attention would move on soon. Memes fade, stories shift, and the digital tide hunts for its next tremor. But moments like this, moments when grace meets arrogance and holds steady, outlive their hashtags. The narrator's tone warms, reaching outward now. Dignity isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It lives in posture, in persistence, in the refusal to meet mockery with rage. It wins not by conquering others, but by never surrendering to imitation. For everyone watching across the nation, the moral settled deep. You could feel it under the surface noise of social media, in offices and living rooms where people whispered, she didn't lose her cool. She just won the room. For immigrants building futures brick by brick, for kids told they were too different or too ambitious, the message wasn't abstract, it was personal. Because Jasmine's calm was not innate, it was trained in the fires of every doubt she had ever outrun. That was the secret. Her stillness wasn't absence of emotion, it was mastery of it. She had turned control into art. Outside the courthouse, cameras had finally powered down. Reporters spoke in softer voices now, analyzing the timeline that led to the reversal. Yet for Jasmine, it was already in the past. She walked toward her car under a violet evening sky, evidence folder clasped like an extension of herself. The wind lifted a faint tune from the street musician on the corner, unintentional but poetic, soft chords scattering upward. The narrator lets the thought rest. There's a beauty in quiet victories. They remind us that while mockery echoes, truth reverberates. Back inside, Judge Beryl stood at last. She looked at her own reflection in the empty gallery glass, the faint outline of her robe against the fading light. For a moment, she almost smiled, this time, not from dismissal, but from humility. And as the lights dimmed and the cameras powered down, one truth lingered louder than any laughter ever could. The story doesn't end in that courtroom, it just changes location. Now it belongs to every watcher who saw themselves in her restraint, to everyone who's ever had to breathe steady when the world tilted arrogant. Jasmine Crockett proved what preparation sounds like when it finally speaks. Evidence doesn't shout, it summons silence. The narrator's voice steadies, inviting connection. When arrogance laughs at you, will you crumble, or correct it with proof? Across screens, hearts, timelines, the same challenge ripples outward. Stay ready. Know your facts. Hold your calm. Because the power that flipped that courtroom isn't reserved for televised moments. It's waiting in living rooms, classrooms, workplaces, board meetings, anywhere someone decides to answer disrespect with undeniable truth. The imagery swells, families watching the clip together, students replaying her tone before presentations, ordinary citizens sitting a little straighter at their desks. This is what civic pride looks like in real time, not spectacle but integrity. The narrator continues, softer now but resolute. The proof you carry may not fit in a folder, but it's still the same weapon: knowledge, preparation, dignity. Those are the receipts no one can delete. Music rises faintly, strings and warmth, hopeful more than heroic. The scene dissolves between faces on screens and quiet resolve behind them. So share this moment, the narrator concludes. Not just the clip, but what it means. Remind those around you that truth, spoken without hate, still moves mountains. Then, as the frame fades to black, the line hangs suspended like the final echo in a hall that once rang with laughter. In the end, laughter fades, but truth echoes.